Tristan argued that marijuana should continue to remain illegal. However, the argument provided is flawed and incoherent in terms of logical reasoning, lack of evidence, and the use of rhetorical techniques of pathos, which is the manipulation of the audience's emotion, as opposed to logos, which is a rationally constructed claim. Tristan's three major claims were that legalizing marijuana will have a negative effect on American society as a whole. Secondly, he also advances the argument that marijuana use has negative effects on the individual, for example, in terms of causing fatalities. The third and final claim of the speaker is that marijuana is a difficult substance to regulate and it can be grown easily anywhere by almost anyone. To begin with, the first claim that marijuana use will have a negative effect on the American society as a whole. The speaker is essentially speculating as how the introduction of a particular law, in this case, the introduction of legalization of marijuana, will affect the American society as a whole. This is purely a conjectural claim. How can the speaker know how the introduction of a singular law will change this monolithic entity known as American society? The speaker is using a flawed form of inductive reasoning whereby he is taking a particular case or event and then using it to make a greater claims. And in this essence is a form of a logical fallacy. One case is then projected onto a whole. This is also problematic as an argument because it presupposes that there exists some unified and homogeneous idea of what American society is. Whose American society is the speaker concerned with will be destroyed? The American society of an oligarch, the rich class who controls lobby groups and makes laws? Or is it the pharmaceutical industry which would not want to see widespread marijuana use as an alternative to the drugs it sells? We know that American society is a diverse society. The speaker then goes on to make a very direct claim regarding the effect of marijuana use on the individual. He claims that marijuana use will produce individual fatalities. I would like to know precisely the scientific source used to make this claim insofar that this claim is one based on evidence that should be objective as opposed to subjective. For example, in my research I came across the following peer-reviewed journal article by Robert Gabel where he performed a literature review on cannabis use, where no recorded cases of overdose deaths from cannabis have been found in extensive literature reviews. The website also states that Gabel's article is merely one of many literature reviews that have performed on this subject. The cause and effect relationship that the speaker has presented to us appears to be entirely false, without any foundation in real scientific data. Accordingly, the speaker is attempting to use a rhetorical technique once again, that of pathos, to inspire fear in the audience about the danger of this drug called marijuana, instead of using scientific evidence to back up the claim that should be entirely based on scientific evidence. The speaker's third claim is that marijuana is hard to control and hard to regulate by government officials. This is perhaps correct, however, the speaker is using the point to defend that continued illegal status of marijuana. I do not see the logical connection between these 2 points. For example, if marijuana is difficult to monitor, control, and regulate, how can the speaker claim to know that marijuana is everywhere? He has no official statistics to back this up, perhaps only some personal anecdote about that one hippie we all know who has a single cannabis plant growing in his room. This claim, in other words, is itself a logical contradiction. Also, there is a logical contradiction in the last claim where he states that marijuana should continue to be outlawed because it is difficult to control. However, if it is difficult to control and already outlawed, how will continuing its illegal status remedy this situation? The debate here should be focused on the legalization of marijuana, its pros and cons, but what the speaker is essentially arguing for with this claim is that the exact opposite to his intent. He is essentially stating that the existing marijuana laws are completely inefficient and ineffective to the extent that they have failed to control and monitor and regulate marijuana growth. He's saying that the current marijuana laws are poor when considering previous evidence such as 0 deaths caused by cannabis. What would such an increase in the control on what is essentially a harmless substance accomplish? In summary, the problem with this third point and the basis of my counterclaim, as based on the speaker's original argument, is that the arguments here are incoherent to the extent that the control of marijuana is related to current laws, and if this control is insufficient, this means that the current marijuana laws, which the speaker is essentially defending as are entirely insufficient. I think that this is an explicit contradiction in reasoning that essentially has nothing to do with the use at hand as to whether marijuana should or should not be legalized. Rather, such a point is more at home in a debate that begins from the starting point that marijuana is illegal, and how can we prevent its continued spread, like the debate about heroin.
All right, you've got a general approach that you're taking, challenging the reasoning and focusing on mistakes in the advocate's way of forwarding their claims. You list the secondary issues pretty clearly, and then you begin making your argument, so it's pretty easy to follow there. The notion about the idea being conjecture, yes, it is a claim of future fact, and you ask a question about how could we reach that conclusion? And you basically basically answer your own question. He could do it by inductive reasoning. Your argument, though, is that the example that they're using is not an accurate example. It's not descriptive. It's not sufficient to reach that particular conclusion. I didn't really get much description of what the advocate's example or proof was, if they had a particular case that they referred to. I don't remember. If we were hearing this as a debate, for instance, it would have been just a few minutes ago, and I would be able to pick that out. So I think you could identify a little bit more, but all I hear from you is, that the case is inadequate. I'm going, well, what was inadequate about it? Why was it problematic? Because I don't remember. The whole discussion about American society and all of that other kind of stuff, it's so esoteric, I don't know that it gets you anything. It might look good in a paper, but as an oral argument, it sounds like you're blowing smoke up our skirts. You want to get to the essential here, and that is, look, American society is diverse, complex, and the likelihood that it's suddenly going to change because of a minor alteration in something that people are already using anyway doesn't seem like it's a very strong argument that we're all going to fall apart as a consequence of that, which seems to be the inference that the advocate is making, and I think that's a problem. Let's keep it simple. The language that you have, oh my gosh, you sound like you're writing some paper for NARA, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, and you're having a philosophy class discussion as opposed to an oral argument. So keep it straightforward and simple. The individual risk, I do think that you have a good challenge here on whether or not the advocate's source on this was scientific in nature. You didn't specify what the advocate's evidence was on this particular point. Your argument talks about the issue of overdose. I don't know that the advocate was suggesting that overdose was the likely source of problems. There are a whole litany of health issues and potential fatality issues that are related to marijuana that don't have anything to do with overdosing on it. So I don't know that your argument applies. It may very well apply, but I don't know because you didn't tell us what the evidence was that the advocate was saying, and because we're not hearing it immediately in this situation, that makes it a little bit more complicated. The idea that it's a fear appeal issue, it's fear appeal if he's only trying to scare us and doesn't provide any evidence that there's a risk. I don't know what the evidence was. There is statistical evidence, for instance, that shows in places like Colorado where they've legalized marijuana that they have higher accident rates, and there's some anecdotal evidence about hospital admissions and that sort of thing. But I don't know that that's the evidence that the advocate presented, so it's hard to assess there. I think your argument on the third point is similar to the one that Frank was making on the issue of prostitution, and that is, this is not unique. It's difficult to control now. It would be difficult to control when it's legalized. So why is this an issue? Why is this something that is problematic about legalization? It's really just the nature of the beast there. And I think that you go back to that argument and make the same point that you made earlier, and that is that it's not going to alter society that much because everybody who wants to use it for, he says that, every hippie's growing one. I'm not sure that you want to disagree with that. I think what the point that you say is, yeah, and so what's going to change if we legalize it? They'll be growing two? Why would that be more dangerous? All right. Thank you.